I was never the kind of girl who sparked scandals. Quite the opposite. In Bell Hollow, I was the pastor's daughter, the one who knew exactly what to say, how to act, what to wear, and above all, how to avoid drawing attention. From a young age, I learned to be a reflection of what others expected of me. My steps were light, my voice soft, and even my smile seemed perfectly measured, as if crafted to fit the town's idea of decency. But there was something inside me that always pulsed stronger, hidden beneath layers of obedience and silence. I felt it when I was alone, when the world stopped watching, and a void began to breathe in the depths of my chest, a kind of absence of myself, as if I were merely a mirror of a life invented by others. Then, on an ordinary afternoon, with the heat clinging to my clothes and the smell of burnt oil wafting from the new auto shop on the corner, I saw him, Elias Reyes, tall, lean, hands stained with grease, and his eyes were the most dangerous part. Not because they were dark, but because they seemed too calm for someone with his reputation. It was the kind of gaze that didn't ask permission to enter. It just invaded. He stared at me for 2 seconds, too long to be polite, and in that brief moment something ancient and forgotten inside me stirred. It was as if my body recognized something before my mind could catch up. Heat crept up my neck, my stomach churned, and my heart, always restrained, always serene, stumbled inside my chest. I walked home that day with trembling legs and a metallic taste in my mouth, as if I'd crossed an invisible line without realizing it. No one else seemed to notice. But within me, a spark had already ignited, and what began as a simple glance, a thread of energy coursing under my skin, would soon become a fire that neither time, nor guilt, nor all the prayers in the world could extinguish. For days, I tried to convince myself it was a lapse, a fleeting mistake, a silly distraction caused by exhaustion or the stifling heat of that summer. But then I saw him again, at the corner store, holding a bottle of iced tea and scanning the shelves as if every item there was too strange to deserve his attention. I was in the next aisle, searching for flour for my mother, but my hands shook so much I dropped a bag. The dull thud on the floor made him turn, and for some reason, I'll never understand, he smiled. Not a wide grin, the kind that screams intent. Just a slight lift of one corner of his mouth, a trace of irony or perhaps understanding, as if saying, I'm out of place too. And there, between shelves and shy glances, something began that time could never fully define. We started crossing paths with a frequency too unlikely to be coincidence. In front of the diner, on the sidewalk by the abandoned school, at the entrance to the trail leading to the lake no one visited since the 90s, he never forced anything, never said much. Sometimes he just watched. Other times he ventured a short sentence, a simple question, but always laced with a weight that made me rethink everything I thought I knew about the world and about myself. I didn't tell anyone, not my best friend from church, not my mother, who read me with trained eyes. I started making excuses to leave the house, inventing errands that didn't exist, all for a few minutes of shared silence with this stranger who made me feel alive, as if my blood flowed differently when he was near. Each time our fingers brushed, passing a book, helping me over a broken fence, steadying me when I slipped on wet earth, a shiver ran down my spine as if God himself were watching. And maybe he was. But for the first time I wasn't afraid. Not truly afraid. What I felt wasn't a passing temptation, the kind that fades with time. It was hunger, a calling, as if I'd spent my whole life in silence and suddenly heard my own voice screaming for freedom within me. I knew I was crossing lines, that this wouldn't end well. But even so, I didn't stop, because with him, I finally felt whole. It was on a Friday night that everything finally breached the boundary of the bearable and the invisible. The youth service had ended. The church still smelled of polished wood and cheap perfume, and I said goodbye as I always did, with a gentle smile, a restrained nod, and steady steps toward the back door, where no one paid much attention. I walked to the open field behind the abandoned school, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear my own thoughts. He was already there, leaning against the old iron gate, hands in his pockets, gaze fixed on the sky, as if the universe above was the only place where he felt understood. When he saw me, he said nothing. Neither did I. The truth is, our words were always few, but our silences. Oh, the silences screamed. He approached slowly as if respecting my fear while refusing to retreat. And then for the first time, he touched me differently. Not a brush or a helping hand. It was his hand in mine, warm, firm, and instead of pulling away, I gripped back. My entire body reacted, as if something dormant in me had awakened with a roar. He looked at me closely, so close I could count the tiny scars on his cheek, hear the restrained breath in his chest. And there, under that heavy, dark sky, our lips met. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't indecent. It was intense, almost reverent. A kiss that seemed to apologize for existing, yet couldn't help but be born. A kiss that said, "I see you." When we pulled apart for a moment, the world seemed to stop. I should have been regretful. I should have been confused, or at least scared. But I wasn't. For the first time, I felt at peace. As if that version of me, the one I hid even from God, had finally found a home. I walked home that night with wet eyes, but not from guilt. It was preemptive longing, because something told me that after that moment nothing would ever be the same, and I was right. The days that followed were the sweetest and cruelest of my life. On the outside, I remained the perfect daughter. I went to church, smiled at neighbors, delivered baskets of bread to the elderly in the congregation. But inside, I was ablaze. Each time I stepped away from Elias, it was as if I were leaving behind not just a forbidden love, but the only part of me that was true. Our meetings grew more frequent, more silent, more intense. Sometimes we didn't even exchange words, just being near, feeling each other's warmth, letting our fingers touch, our gazes linger too long. Elias was a mystery I wanted to unravel with my hands, my lips, my entire soul. And by his side, I saw myself differently. More alive, more courageous, more me. He didn't ask anything of me, didn't demand promises, didn't try to change what I believed. He just looked at me as if he knew I carried the world on my shoulders and was tired of being so good to others while forgetting to be good to myself. But Bell Hollow wasn't the kind of town that left stories like ours alone for long. The calm is just how small places bide their time before striking with their cruelest weapon, the sharp tongues of those who deem themselves holy. It started as whispers. First about the time I spent away from home, then about the times I was seen near the auto shop. Someone swore they saw me smiling. Too much. Another said Elias was dangerous, that he had a look that shouldn't be on any pastor's daughter. And even without proof, the suspicion began to ferment like old wine, bitter, inevitable. My father started watching me more closely. My friends began treating me with a wary kindness, as if they smelled sin but lacked the courage to accuse. And still, I didn't stop. I couldn't. Elias and I met in secret, with more haste, more urgency, as if we knew time was running out. Each touch felt laced with farewell. Each kiss tasted like the last. And deep down, we knew. We were dancing on a thread too thin to bear the weight of that love. It was on a rainy afternoon, when the world seemed intent on washing away all our sins, that everything collapsed. An elderly couple from the church saw us together, hand in hand, in the abandoned barn by the river. That was all it took. Words flew faster than reason. That same day, my father confronted me with eyes I'd never seen, not those of a pastor, but of a wounded man. He didn't shout, he didn't need to. His disappointment spoke louder than any sermon. I felt myself shrink before him, not out of shame for what I'd done, but because in that moment he no longer saw his daughter. He saw only the scandal. Elias, meanwhile, was threatened. They told him he should leave if he wanted to avoid bigger trouble, that this wasn't a place for people like him. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for me. He wanted to pull away, said he loved me, but didn't want to ruin my life, and I, with my chest torn open inside, let him. I nodded, tears in my eyes, and watched him go. Each step he took was a fire ignited on my skin. But I stood there, motionless, convinced I was doing the right thing. Except the fire. The fire didn't go out. Not that night, not ever. The weeks that followed were made of absence. His absence, but also my own. I moved through the town like a shadow of who I'd been, performing duties as if my soul had hidden in some corner even faith couldn't reach. My father's sermons grew harsher, as if speaking directly to me, even when he avoided my eyes. The church whispered my name with a weight that suffocated me, and even the pews that once felt like home now seemed like traps. My mother tried to comfort me with recipes and lukewarm hugs, but there was a chasm between us she didn't know how to cross. I dressed as I always had, walked as I always had, said the same words, but inside was a devastated field. And in silence, I hated each day that dawned without his face, without the sound of his rough voice saying my name, as if the world stopped there. I tried to convince myself it was right. That time would heal. That distance would put everything back in place. But the truth was, a constant agony burned beneath the surface of my obedience. I didn't eat properly, didn't sleep well, and whenever I looked in the mirror, a stranger stared back. Bell Hollow might have forgiven me in time. The town loves redemption stories when they're convenient. But I couldn't forgive myself for letting Elias go. Because even apart, even silent, I still loved him with every fiber of my being. He had become part of my breathing, not a whim, not a rebellion. He was home. He was truth. And truth, when denied for too long, turns to pain. One afternoon, while sweeping the church porch, I overheard two men laughing loudly across the street. They stood in front of the auto shop where Elias and his father had worked for a few months, before the scandal. One of them remarked, unaware I was listening, that the shop kid had been attacked on the road out of town, probably by someone who didn't want trash around here. My hands froze. The broom handle fell. The ground spun. I didn't think, didn't hesitate, didn't ask permission. I ran as if my life depended on it, as if the world would end if I delayed a second longer. My heart pounded like a runaway drum, and each step was a scream. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. And when I saw him slumped by the roadside, lips split, gaze dulled, I felt my world crack. I knelt beside him, uncaring if anyone saw. I touched his face with trembling hands and repeated his name so many times it felt like a prayer. He opened his eyes slowly and tried to smile. Said he was leaving anyway, that I didn't need to worry. But I couldn't answer. I just cried. Cried for everything I'd swallowed in silence, for everything I'd denied in the name of right, for every moment I let fear decide for me. And there, with the salty taste of my tears mixing with his blood, I understood. There was no going back. Either I faced the world for him, or I'd spend the rest of my life drowning in regret. That same night, after taking him back to the house where he was staying with his father, a simple place smelling of damp wood, with walls that seemed to hold the world from collapsing, I returned home carrying more than guilt. I carried certainty. For the first time, I didn't feel torn. There was no more room for doubt, for pretense, for the suffocating role of the model daughter in a town that never asked who I really was. I didn't sleep. I spent hours sitting on the edge of my bed, listening to the sounds of the sleeping house, while inside everything burned. And when the sun finally began to rise, painting the sky with hues of regret and courage, I stood. I dressed in the first clothes I found, not modest, not provocative. They were mine. I tied my hair without care, descended the stairs in silence, and for the first time in a long while, I knocked on my father's study door, not as a daughter, but as a woman. He was reading the Bible, as he always did on Saturday mornings. When he saw me, he raised his eyes with a mix of surprise and caution. But I didn't ask permission. I didn't ask for a blessing. I spoke firmly, though my voice trembled. Father, I'm still your daughter, but I'm also someone who loves, and I won't hide it anymore. He didn't answer right away. He just looked at me, long, deep, as if trying to find the girl who always obeyed him, but I was no longer her. And he understood. I saw in his eyes the pain of rupture. I saw the hurt, the frustration, the fear. But I didn't see anger, and maybe that hurt more. I left with my heart in pieces, but at peace. Because I knew from that moment on, I was no longer lying to anyone, not to God, not to myself. When I returned to Elias, he was still weary-eyed and bruised, but there was a different light in him, a kind of awe, perhaps. I sat beside him, took his hand, and said only, "Don't leave again." And he didn't. We stayed there in silence, as we always did in the most important moments. But in that silence was everything we needed to know. That, even wounded, even judged, even carrying the weight of being who we shouldn't be, we were still whole in each other. Because love, when it's true, survives the dark, the fear, and even the shame. And ours had already proven to be more than a spark. It was flame, it was living fire, and it was only beginning to burn. The first time I walked down Bale Hollow's main street, holding Elias's hand, I felt every stare like a knife. People didn't speak, not there, not directly. But their silence said everything. The forced smiles, the averted eyes, the whispers born behind shop windows and hedgerows. It wasn't anger I felt anymore. It was a kind of bitter liberation, as if each judgment confirmed I'd chosen the right path. I no longer belonged to those expectations, to that glass dome where I was raised, and if loving Elias was the price of that freedom, I'd pay it with my chest open. The following Sunday I returned to church, not as the pastor's daughter, not as a repentant girl seeking forgiveness. I returned as a whole woman. Elias stayed outside, out of respect, fear, or perhaps shame, but I went in. The service had already begun, and my father was at the pulpit, preaching with the steady voice that shaped my entire childhood. When he saw me, his eyes hesitated for a second. I walked to the front pew. I sat alone. I felt the weight of discomfort spread through the pews like a silent fire. But I stayed, because that place, that faith, that story, they were mine too, even if I didn't follow the script everyone expected. At the end, my father didn't call me to talk. He didn't hug me, but he also didn't cast me out. And maybe, coming from him, that was a kind of acceptance. Bell Hollow took time to get used to the idea. There were invitations that stopped coming, glances that never returned to kindness. But there were also silences that slowly broke, people who began to look beyond the rumors, and hands that reached out again. Elias found work in a nearby town. We started building a simple life, far from altars and expectations, but full of truth. And the love, that fire, never faded. It wasn't easy. It never is. But it was ours. And when I look at him now, sitting on the porch at dusk with the sunlight casting shadows on his face, I still feel that shiver from the first time. I still remember the kiss under the cloudy sky. I still hear within me the sound of chains breaking when I decided to stay. Because the love that chose us didn't come to be hidden. It came to endure. It came to burn. And even after everything, it still blazes. Years have passed. The dust of the scandals has settled. Faces have changed. And Bell Hollow no longer whispers behind our backs as often. Some still don't understand. Maybe they never will. But what we built together never needed their approval, only our courage. Elias planted a garden in the yard of our small house. Each flower that blooms there is a living reminder of what we overcame. Our love, once hidden in shadows and fears, now grows in the daylight, with roots too deep to be uprooted. Sometimes I sit beside him and watch him in silence, and I realize how time, far from extinguishing what we feel, has only tempered our love with patience, tenderness, and truce. We didn't become heroes, nor martyrs, just two souls who decided not to give up on each other. Because in the end, the fire that began with a glance across a town that wanted us apart never faded. It only became home.